She thought he was the janitor, but the man fixing the copier was the millionaire CEO, in disguise. "Seriously? Not now?" Betty muttered under her breath, slamming the printer tray closed for the third time. The screen blinked the same message in cold defiance. Paper jam, tray 2. Her fingers trembled as she tried to pry the drawer open again. Her report, 3 weeks of late nights and early mornings, needed to be in the hands of her manager in less than 15 minutes. The meeting upstairs had already started. From behind, someone grumbled, "If you're done crying over the printer, maybe let someone else try." Betty flinched. "Sorry," she whispered, stepping aside. The man passed by with a huff. She rubbed her temples. Her blouse was damp at the collar. She hadn't even had her coffee. Her stomach turned, not from hunger but from that sinking, familiar weight. Failure. She was 29, with a 3-year-old daughter and a 2-bedroom apartment she could barely afford. 3 years ago, she was a stay-at-home mom, baking dinosaur cupcakes and folding onesies. Then came the divorce, the betrayal, the court dates, the long, aching silence of her parents' disapproval, and now she was an invisible assistant on a 1-year contract in one of the largest tech firms in the state. No one remembered her name. They called her admin, or worse, nothing at all. She stared at the machine, willing it to come back to life. "Please," she whispered, fingers poised over the power button like a surgeon. "Just this once." "Need a hand?" The voice startled her. It was low, calm, almost amused. She turned. A man stood there, maybe mid-30s, tall, broad shoulders beneath a rolled-up blue shirt. His jeans were worn but clean, and he held a wrench loosely at his side like he had used it all his life. No badge, no clipboard, just a calm presence and faint smell of fresh pine soap. Yes, the tray's jammed and," she stammered, stepping back. "I think it hates me." He chuckled and crouched beside the printer, his hands moving with practiced ease. "Machines don't hate, but they do get tired, just like people." Betty watched as he slid out the tray and flipped open a back panel she did not even know existed. His hands were clean but calloused, real hands, not office ones. He didn't look like someone from this building. Everyone here wore watches that cost more than her rent. He didn't even wear a belt. "Thanks," she murmured, hugging her file close to her chest. He glanced up at her. "Tough morning?" Betty let out a sharp laugh, then bit her lip. "You could say that. I'm probably the only person here who cries in the bathroom at 8:00 a.m. on a Monday." He smirked, but said nothing, gently nudging a lever inside the tray. "I swear," she went on, her voice suddenly unfiltered by exhaustion. "This place. It's all perfect glass walls and empty smiles. Everyone talks metrics and synergy and deliverables, but no one actually sees each other. My manager? Brilliant on paper, cold as marble in person." Still silent, the man pulled out a crumpled piece of paper that had twisted into the printer's roller. "There's your culprit." Betty blinked. "You fixed it?" He nodded, stood, and wiped his hands on a small cloth from his back pocket. "You should be good now." As the printer whirred back to life, Betty almost cried again. "Thank you. Really. You just saved my entire week." He handed her the first crisp sheet as it emerged. Their fingers touched for a second, and she looked up at him, into his eyes. They were gray, stormy, but not unkind. "You're welcome," he said simply. She tilted her head. "What's your name? You don't have a badge." He hesitated, then smiled. "Just passing through." Before she could press further, he started to turn away, but then paused and looked back over his shoulder. "Sometimes people pretend not to see," he said quietly, "until someone brave enough speaks." Betty stood frozen, the warm paper clutched in her hand, but when she looked up again, he was already gone, disappeared down the hallway as silently as he had come. For a moment she forgot the time, the meeting, the stress. For the first time in months, someone had really seen her, and it had taken a stranger in jeans and rolled sleeves with no name, no title, and a wrench to make her feel real again. She pressed the button to reprint the final copy. As the pages slid out, her hands felt steadier, her spine a little straighter, her eyes not quite so heavy. Something had shifted. She could feel it. The email came in without fanfare early Monday morning. No subject line, just one sentence. Please report to the executive office on the 12th floor at 10 o'clock IMMM. Hayes. Betty froze. She reread it 5 times, her hands tightening around the edges of her keyboard. Her stomach dropped. Mason Hayes? The CEO? She immediately thought the worst. Did someone report her? Was it about that overdue expense log? Or maybe someone overheard her venting about the manager by the copier. Her face flushed just remembering it. She had nearly cried that morning in frustration, standing in front of the broken printer. And then, him. The man in rolled-up sleeves and jeans. She thought he was maintenance. He fixed the machine with barely a word and left her with a cryptic sentence she still could not shake. Sometimes people pretend not to see until someone brave enough speaks. And now, this email. At 9:57 a.m., Betty stood at the elevator, her blouse tucked in, palms clammy, every heartbeat loud in her ears. When the doors opened to the 12th floor, she stepped into another world. The lighting here was warmer, golden. The carpet muffled her footsteps. The space smelled faintly of cedar and something expensive she could not name. Everything was rich woods, matte blacks, and soft textures, a world apart from the buzzing, fluorescent cubicles 2 floors below. The receptionist greeted her with a polished smile. "Mr. Hayes is expecting you." Her throat tightened. She followed the corridor past sleek glass walls, every step heavier than the last. The double doors at the end opened automatically with a soft click, and there he was. Gone were the jeans. The man from the printer now stood behind a massive desk, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. Storm gray eyes, clean-shaven jawline, composed posture. The same man, but somehow entirely different. "Brown 20s, Dak said. Betty's voice caught. "You—" Mason Hayes gave a small nod. "Yes, I remember you. Betty, right?" She nodded. "Barely. I am sorry for the mystery. Please, have a seat." She sat slowly, gripping her bag in her lap. "Am I in trouble?" "Not at all," he said. "I asked you here because you reminded me of something important." She blinked, confused. He walked around the desk, leaned on its edge, arms folded casually. "For the past few weeks I've been walking the floors, unannounced, no titles, no introductions. Just listening, watching. The truth is, our company's grown fast. Profits are up. Innovation is booming. But something's missing." He paused. "We lost our humanity." Betty said nothing, unsure if she was allowed to. He smiled gently. "Then I saw you. You smiled at people who didn't return it. Helped that new intern who forgot her password. Held it together when that copier betrayed you. And you let yourself speak honestly, not cruelly, just honestly." She flushed, remembering her exact words. "This place needs more people who actually care." "I heard you," Mason said, still calm. "And I agreed." She bit her lip. "I didn't know." "I know," he interrupted gently. "That's the point." He walked over to a table and picked up a slim folder. "I'm building a small internal task force, Project Phoenix. We're redesigning how we lead, through empathy, inclusion, real connection. I'd like you on it." Her eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes," he said, "exactly you." She let out a shaky breath. "I'm just an admin. You're someone who keeps showing up even when no one claps, who speaks up without a podium. That's leadership, Betty. Real leadership." A lump rose in her throat. She tried to blink it away. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said simply. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time saw not just the CEO, but the man behind the desk, the one who chose to walk the floors instead of sitting above them. "I'd be honored," she whispered. "Wednesday, 8:30 a.m. Conference Room B." "Come as you are," he said. As she exited the office, the hallway did not feel intimidating anymore. Her steps felt lighter. Something within her had shifted. For the first time in years, someone saw her. And even more surprising, she was starting to see herself. Betty had never been in a meeting like this before. There were only 5 people in the glass-walled conference room on the 10th floor, handpicked by Mason Hayes himself. Each one came from a different department, different background, different rung on the company ladder, and yet, somehow, it worked. The first time she stepped in, Betty clutched her notebook like a shield. She wore her second-best blouse and had triple-checked her hair in the mirror that morning. She was used to being the one who listened, not the one expected to speak. But Mason greeted her with a nod, pulled out a chair for her himself, and said, "We don't do formalities here, we do truth." That first meeting was quiet for her. She listened more than she spoke, noting how the others tossed out ideas about making the workplace more inclusive, more compassionate. Mason never dominated the room. He asked questions. He let silence stretch until someone filled it. He listened like it was the most important part of his job. On the second day, Betty found a cup of coffee waiting on her desk before the meeting. It was exactly how she liked it. Light, no sugar. Tucked beneath the cup's cardboard sleeve was a small post-it note in tight, slanted handwriting. "Thanks for reminding me how much kindness matters. M." Betty stared at it for several seconds, unsure whether to laugh or cry. No one had ever thanked her just for being kind. By the 3rd week, something had changed. She no longer hesitated when asked for her thoughts. When the topic of emotional burnout came up, she spoke softly but clearly. Sometimes people don't leave because of the workload. They leave because no one sees them. Mason met her gaze, nodded once, and wrote it down. Word for word. Later that day, he stopped her in the hallway. "That line, it's going up in the next company newsletter. It deserves to be heard." Betty flushed. "Really?" He smiled. "Really." Every week, she found a new cup of coffee waiting. Sometimes with a quote, sometimes with a thank you. Once it just read, "You've changed more here in 2 weeks than some have in 10 years." She began to carry herself differently, not because she wanted Mason's approval, but because, for the first time, she felt her presence mattered, that she could affect something beyond a spreadsheet. Other team members started asking her advice. One even called her the heart of the project during a brainstorming session. Betty laughed it off, but deep down, it stirred something powerful inside her. For years, she had shrunk herself to fit into corners. Now, she was learning to take up space again. Mason never made it about him. He always gave credit, always asked how others were doing before giving instructions. But there was something in the way he looked at Betty during those meetings, an attentiveness that wasn't professional, yet never crossed a line. She noticed how he paused when she spoke, how he leaned slightly forward, hands folded, genuinely listening. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a kind of recognition. After one particularly long session, as they exited the room, Mason walked beside her. "You're good at this," he said. "Nation." "At what?" "At seeing people, really seeing them. That's rare." She didn't know how to respond, so she just said, "Thank you." He looked at her then, not the way a boss looks at an employee, but like someone trying to read a story still being written. "You remind me," he said quietly, "why I started this company in the first place." And just like that, the space between them grew warmer, more familiar, not romantic, not yet, but undeniably human. By the end of the month, Betty had stopped double-checking her words. She no longer sat at the edge of her seat. She spoke, she challenged, she suggested, and when she laughed, it wasn't apologetic. Each morning, the coffee cup still waited. But now she looked forward to it, not just for the caffeine, but for what it symbolized. A small act, a big change, and a man who saw her not as a project, but as a person. Betty had always kept her head down. Even in the new culture committee meetings, even with Mason's support, she tried not to attract too much attention. But lately she could feel the change. And not all of it was welcome. Whispers started the week after Mason quoted her in the company newsletter. Betty had submitted the line without attaching her name, but somehow it got out. "She acts like she's better than us just because the boss likes her," someone muttered just outside the break room. Betty had stepped out to refill her water bottle and froze when she heard it. The voice belonged to Dana, a senior admin who had been at the company for over a decade. "I bet she thinks she's next in line for promotion," another voice added. "You know how these things go when the CEO starts paying attention to a pretty face." Betty didn't move. Her hand tightened around the bottle, the plastic crinkling under her grip. She blinked hard and turned back toward her desk, heart pounding. She had always feared this, being seen, only to be torn apart. That afternoon, as she waited for the elevator alone, the same group approached. They fell into uncomfortable silence as they recognized her, standing just outside the closing doors. The tension was thick. Then, unexpectedly, Mason stepped into the hallway. He looked crisp as always, dark blazer, white shirt, rolled at the sleeves, but his eyes scanned the group with unspoken clarity. He joined them in front of the elevator, standing between Betty and the others. The silence cracked. Dana cleared her throat, pretending to check her phone. Another woman adjusted her badge lanyard, not meeting anyone's eyes. Mason's voice was calm, but firm. "In this company, we respect those who speak with courage," he said, not looking at anyone in particular, but his meaning unmistakable. "You can join the change or be left behind." The elevator dinged. He stepped in first, holding the door with a light touch. No one followed. Betty stood frozen for a second, then slowly joined him inside. Neither of them spoke. But when their eyes met, Mason gave her the smallest, most reassuring smile, one that said, "You're not alone." Later that day, HR sent out an announcement. All employees were to attend a new Empathy in the Workplace training, with the executive team leading the sessions. It was not framed as a punishment, but everyone knew it was a response. The next morning, Betty arrived at her desk to find a small white box tied with a gold ribbon. Beside it, a folded note, written in a looping, slightly nervous hand. "We're sorry. Thanks for doing what we didn't dare." Inside the box were lemon shortbread cookies, Betty's favorite. She didn't know how they knew, but the gesture softened her heart instantly. She looked up and caught Dana watching her from the other side of the floor. Their eyes met. Dana gave a tiny nod. At lunch, two of the women from that same group asked Betty if she wanted to join them for takeout. She hesitated, then accepted. Over sandwiches and fruit cups, they talked about kids, late-night email habits, and the ridiculous price of parking. What started as surface-level small talk slowly turned into laughter. By the end of the week, they were sending each other restaurant menus and debating who had the best office mug collection. One afternoon, Dana tapped Betty's desk and dropped off a coffee. "Truce?" she said, half joking. Betty smiled. "I think we're way past that." In the weeks that followed, Betty no longer felt invisible. Not because she was suddenly popular, but because, for the first time in years, she felt like she belonged. Her co-workers weren't perfect, neither was she. But the ice had broken, and sometimes that was all it took to build something better. Not a speech, not a policy, just one small, brave moment. And someone, maybe not everyone, choosing to follow. The apartment was quiet except for the soft, uneven breathing of Carol, her tiny body curled up on the couch, flushed with fever. Betty sat nearby on the floor, her back against the coffee table, phone in hand, checking the time between counting seconds between coughs. She had already called the pediatrician, administered the prescribed medicine, and now there was nothing left to do but wait. Carol stirred and whimpered, reaching out in her sleep. Betty crawled over and gently stroked her daughter's damp curls. "Mommy's here," she whispered. Her voice cracked. It had been years since Betty felt this helpless. Since her divorce, she'd learned to survive on her own. School drop-offs, last-minute bills, hospital visits. No one else showed up. She stopped expecting them to. That afternoon she had emailed her manager and Mason, apologizing profusely for missing the culture meeting. Mason's reply had come in under 2 minutes. "Take care of your little one. Everything else can wait." She read it twice. No one had ever told her that before. At 3:40 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Startled, Betty tiptoed to the peephole, half expecting it to be a neighbor or delivery mix-up. But there stood a courier in uniform, holding a small, bright blue package wrapped in ribbon. "For a Betty Moore?" he asked when she opened the door slightly. She nodded hesitantly and took the package. "No signature needed," he said with a smile, and walked away. Betty closed the door, locked it, and turned the package over in her hands. Her name was handwritten in black ink across the tag. It was light, the shape of a toy box. She carried it back into the living room and sat down beside Carol again. The ribbon untied easily. Inside was a soft plush bunny, white with floppy ears and stitched pink hearts on its paws. Carol had pointed out the same toy once at the grocery store. Beneath the bunny was a folded note. "For Carol. Hope she gets better soon. From someone who thinks her mom's doing a great job." Betty blinked at the handwriting. There was a second line, scribbled below in smaller script. "You take care of so many. Let someone take care of you, just a little." She read the note again, then again. Her hand slowly moved to cover her mouth. The tears came before she could stop them. Soft at first, then thick and fast. She cried not just for Carol, or for the fear of being alone in an emergency, but for every day she had forced herself to smile when she felt invisible. For the times she had been strong, because she had no other choice. And now, because someone had quietly, gently said, "You don't have to be." She pressed the note to her chest. When Carol stirred again, Betty picked her up and placed the bunny in her lap. The child's fevered fingers curled around one of its ears without opening her eyes. "Look, sweetie," Betty whispered, "he came just for you." The next day, Carol's fever broke. The plush bunny stayed tucked in her arms through the night. At work the following Monday, Betty spotted a familiar handwriting in the corner of a white sticky note on her desk. "Hope the little bunny helped." There was no signature, but she did not need one. She smiled to herself as she sat down, fingers brushing the edge of her keyboard. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was the only one holding the weight. Someone had noticed, and someone had cared. Betty was walking home from Carol's preschool when she saw him. Dressed in a button-down shirt and slacks, hair slicked back like he was playing a role, Tom leaned against a black SUV parked by the curb. He looked like he belonged to a different life, a life Betty had fought hard to leave behind. But the glint in his eyes hadn't changed. "Well, well," he said, straightening up. "You live in a condo now? New man, new life, huh? Must be nice." Betty's heart sank. She pulled Carol close, her hand tightening around her daughter's small one. "I'm just here to pick up my kid," she said flatly. "Leave." Tom smirked. "Relax. I'm not here to cause a scene. Just thought we should settle some things like adults." She didn't respond. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and held it up. "See? I've been thinking. All those years you made my life miserable. Controlling, critical, cold. I think I deserve something for that." Her lips parted. "You what?" 25 grand, he said smoothly. "Call it compensation. Emotional damage, whatever you like. You can afford it now, right? Your company's doing well. You've got a guy, clearly. I'm not giving you a dime, she snapped, voice shaking. He tucked the paper back into his pocket. Then, maybe I file for custody. Tell the court how unstable you've been. Depression, lack of family support, a new boyfriend interfering. You know how that looks. Carol tugged at her coat, confused by the tension. Betty swallowed hard and ushered her toward the door, without another word. That night, she didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling for hours, then paced the living room until her legs gave out. She had no concrete proof of Tom's past threats, no restraining order, no witnesses to the manipulation and isolation he had subjected her to for years. At 2 a.m., she sat on the bathroom floor of her apartment, with the door locked and the light off, her knees pulled to her chest, hands gripping her temples. Her breath came in shallow bursts. She looked up at her reflection in the mirror across from her. Eyes red, shoulders tense, but behind the fear something else flickered. Resolve. I left once, she whispered. I can stand again. The next day at work, she wore a brave face. But Mason noticed. After the meeting, he called her into his office. He did not press. He just looked at her with concern that felt both gentle and fierce. She finally told him everything. Mason listened, silent until the end. Then, without hesitation, he stood, grabbed his coat, and said, "Come with me." They did not go to the police. Not yet. Instead, he drove her to a discreet office downtown. Glass windows, polished floors, and a brass sign that read, "Shelton and Crane, Family Law." "I trust them," Mason said. "But I won't speak for you. You're in charge here. I just brought you to the door." Inside, the attorney, a composed woman in her 50s named Marlene, greeted Betty like an old friend. "Let's sit," she said gently. "Tell me everything." Betty opened her mouth, and for the first time, she let it all out. The control, the guilt-tripping, the subtle threats, the way Tom had made her feel like a burden in her own life, and now, the blackmail. Marlene listened intently, then leaned back. "We'll need emails, voicemails, anything. If there's a paper trail, we'll find it. I've seen men like him." "We don't lose to men like him." Later that night, as Betty walked out of the building, she saw Mason waiting in the lobby with 2 cups of tea. He handed one to her without a word. Betty took a sip, her hands still trembling, but steadier than before. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to thank me," Mason said. "You're the one who stood up today. I just drove." The courtroom was colder than Betty expected. Pale walls, harsh fluorescent lights, rows of strangers waiting their turn with lives in chaos. But nothing felt more chilling than the man sitting across from her. Tom, her ex-husband, dressed like the victim he was pretending to be. A pressed shirt, clean-shaven, that same smug look that used to crush her confidence. Betty sat straight, her palms flat on her lap. Next to her, Marlene, her attorney, was calm and collected. Behind her in the 3rd row, Mason sat silently. He had insisted on being there, not to speak, but to show her she was not alone. The judge entered, and the case was called. Tom's attorney was the first to speak. He painted a story of mental distress, financial hardship, and emotional abuse on Tom's side. "You gave up years of his life," the lawyer declared. "And now, with the respondent enjoying a stable career and a wealthy partner, she owes him compensation for the emotional toll." Betty clenched her jaw, keeping her breath steady. Then it was Marlene's turn. She stood without theatrics, her voice smooth as she laid out the facts. A history of controlling behavior, voicemails where Tom threatened custody unless he got money, a signed complaint from a neighbor who had witnessed Tom yelling outside Betty's old apartment, and finally, the email. Marlene held it up for the judge. A printed message where Tom wrote, "You think just because some rich guy is in your life now you can erase the past? Pay up, or I'll make sure the court takes your daughter." The judge asked if Betty wished to speak. She stood. Her knees were shaking, but her voice was steady. For years I was quiet. I stayed quiet because I thought it kept me and my daughter safe. But silence never protected me. It only protected him. Tom rolled his eyes, but Betty did not look his way. I'm not speaking today as someone who's perfect. I'm not even speaking as someone who's not afraid. I'm terrified, but I'm speaking anyway, because I'm a mother. And Carol deserves a life free from fear, from manipulation, from men who think love means control. A pause. She deserves better, and so do I. The courtroom was silent. The judge looked at Betty with something almost like admiration. After closing remarks, the judge called a recess. Mason didn't move from his seat, but Betty turned just for a moment, and their eyes met. He gave her the smallest nod. His hands were clenched around the wooden armrest. He was proud and furious, and holding back everything except belief in her. The judge returned with the ruling. The petition for compensation was dismissed. Tom's custody request was denied. Furthermore, based on the evidence and past behavior, the court issued a permanent no-contact order. Tom was not to approach Betty or Carol again under any circumstance. Betty exhaled for the first time in days. When it was over, she stepped out into the courthouse hallway, the noise of other cases muffled behind her. Behind her, Mason was there. "You were incredible," he said quietly. Betty blinked back tears. "No," she whispered. "I was just tired of being afraid." He nodded. Then, without another word, he reached for her hand, not to guide her, not to comfort her, but simply to hold it. Equal, present, steady, and for the first time in years, Betty did not flinch. The end-of-year celebration had always been just another formality in Betty's mind, a crowded room with too many name tags and not enough meaning. But this year, everything felt different. The large atrium on the 12th floor had been transformed into a warm, candle-lit space filled with soft music, laughter, and the scent of cinnamon pastries. A banner overhead read, "Celebrating growth, courage, and kindness." Betty stood near the back, blending in as she always had. But she could feel Mason's presence across the room, even before she saw him. He wasn't in a suit this time, just a dark sweater and rolled sleeves, like the first day she met him. Like the man who had fixed the copier and quietly handed her a reason to speak. The lights dimmed slightly as the HR director stepped up to the mic. "And now," she said, smiling, "we come to a special moment, an award that didn't exist until this year, the Inspiration Award. It goes to someone who reminded us that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it works quietly, steadily, and still changes everything." Betty's name was called. Applause followed, genuine, full, the kind that echoed deeper than the walls of the building. As Betty walked up, her heart pounded. Mason met her at the podium, holding the award, an elegant glass sculpture in the shape of a rising flame. But instead of handing it over, he took her hand. "I wasn't supposed to be here today," Mason began, his voice strong but warm. "I mean at this exact spot. A CEO doesn't usually get involved with copier repairs or with award presentations. But then again, some things are worth stepping out of the rule book for." He turned to the crowd. "We need more people like Betty," he said, his eyes locked with hers. "And I need her too." There was a pause, the kind that wrapped a room in a gentle hush. Someone from the crowd whistled softly, others chuckled, but Mason wasn't smiling for show. His hand never left hers. Betty's throat tightened, but before she could say anything, a small blur in a blue dress came dashing toward them. "Mommy! Mommy!" Carol rushed up to the stage, a paper star cradled carefully in her tiny palms. "Are you my friend now, Mr. Mason?" she asked, tilting her head with a wide, toothy grin. Mason crouched down, taking the star gently from her hand. "I'd like to be more than that. If your mom says yes." Betty couldn't speak at first. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away, not this time. She simply nodded, smiling through the emotion. "We both say yes." Laughter and applause burst across the room again, but Betty barely heard it. All she saw was Mason, kneeling beside Carol, holding that fragile paper star like it meant the world. And somehow, it did. Spring came early that year. The park near Betty's apartment had begun to bloom in soft pinks and fresh greens. Children played by the pond, the sun warming the earth, just enough to make everyone believe in new beginnings. On a quiet path, 3 figures walked slowly. Mason held Carol's hand, her curls bouncing with every step. Betty walked beside them, her fingers intertwined with Mason's, the way they did so easily now. Carol ran ahead suddenly, giggling. In her hand she clutched a ribbon-tied origami star. "Look," she called back. "It's flying." They watched her, hearts full. Betty leaned into Mason slightly. "Did you ever think," she whispered, "that a broken printer would fix 2 people?" He smiled, eyes crinkling at the corners. "I think it found exactly who it was supposed to." As Carol twirled under the falling petals, the camera of life zoomed out slowly, the golden light wrapping around them like a promise. And somewhere, in a voice quiet but certain, the story concluded. Time to fix a machine. She needed someone to believe in her. Together they fixed each other. If this story moved your heart, even just a little, if you saw pieces of yourself in Betty's quiet courage or Mason's quiet faith, then maybe, like them, you too believe that even the smallest acts of kindness can change the course of someone's life. Because sometimes, all it takes is one broken copier, one brave voice, one person who chooses to listen. And if you believe in stories that heal, that lift, that remind us of the strength we carry, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more true-to-leap tales of resilience, love, and second chances. Hit that bell so you never miss a moment that might just change your day or your life. Thank you for watching, and remember, real love doesn't save you. It sees you and walks beside you. Oh,